What's going on, everybody? Craig Lieberman back at you. It's hard to argue that the Fast and Furious franchise is now the undisputed king of car-related stunts. After 20 years and 8 movies so far, we've seen cars launch into the air, driven off a cliff, dropped from parking garages, and crushed by a tank. The action sequences in the more recent Fast and Furious movies are seemingly designed just to dispose of unwanted cars. Just blowing these things up left and right. And as of this writing, we're waiting on the release of Fast 9, which has promised us to have a sequence in space. Whether a car is involved or not is anyone's guess. My bet is on the rocket-powered Fiero. Even fans of other car movies like Bullet, Gone in 60 Seconds, and Ronin have to be impressed by the stunts that we've seen in the Fast and Furious movies so far, and who knows where they're going with it. Sure, more advanced CG helps, but the stunt teams on the Fast movies make the practical shots with stunt people look spectacular, that added realism. And while CG is playing bigger and bigger roles in movies these days, action movies are still nothing without stunt people. That's what adds the realism. Since the earliest days of movie making, stunts have been part of our favorite movies. These men and women make stunts seem easy. Today, it's probably a safe bet that 99 times out of 100, no matter how dangerous the stunt looks, the stunts go off perfectly and no one gets hurt. But during my time working on the first couple of Fast and Furious movies, there were a few instances where they didn't go off exactly as planned. Being a stunt player sounds like a dream job, right? In reality, it's hard work and takes decades of training and practice before you'd ever have a shot of landing a role in a blockbuster movie. You don't just walk and say, hey, I can do stunts. It doesn't work like that. As such, the stunt teams who have worked on the Fast and Furious movies are some of the best people in the industry. Many of them have decades of experience. Debbie Evans, look her up on IMDb. In fact, Stunts Unlimited, the company that provided stunt players for many of these movies, has been widely lauded for its amazing work. Occasionally, something still goes wrong. In the first movie, for example, there was one notable incident. It happened during that filming of Brian Super when he's being chased by Johnny Tran and his cousin Lance, and they're driving around up in Echo Park. The cousin and Johnny Tran are on motorcycles, and at one point, one of the motorcycles jumps off onto a dirt section. In this sequence, one of the stunt riders landed a little awkwardly and ended up breaking his leg. Sometimes accidents just happen by sheer luck or bad luck. But the biggest and most complex stunt in the movie had to have been the Charger flip scene. That's the end of the movie. We all remember it. It's legendary. That stunt was done using a pipe ramp to get the Charger to go up and over the front of the big rig. But truth be told, they really had no idea how the car would land. So a beefy roll cage and a suspended racing seat and all the other usual precautions were taken. But when the director shouted action, no one really knew what was going to happen, which way it would land, right side up or whatever. After the stunt, the production team watched the playback over and over and over, and it looked great. And the concern that they had that the fake supercharger would reveal itself in the shot was for nothing. It stayed attached to the hood, and most importantly, of course, the stunt driver was not injured. Although the Charger stunt went off flawlessly, the minor motorcycle incident served as a reminder as to why movie studios don't let actors do their own stunts. Sometimes it's an insurance consideration. They can't get insurance if the actors are going to do their own stunts. And actors are usually prohibited by contract to do their own stunts for several reasons, not the least of which is that an actor who gets injured could delay the film by weeks, months, or years. Of course, there are several actors who actually do some of their own stunts, notably people like Jackie Chan, Daniel Craig, Tom Cruise, Angelina Jolie, and Adam Driver, to name a few. But actors like Jackie Chan are a special case. Jackie Chan actually got into acting only after being a stuntman. That was his original job. But for the most part, there's a limit to what motion picture studios will allow their actors to take on. Paul Walker, of course, liked to take on as many stunts as he felt comfortable doing as long as the studio would approve it. And although all of the stunt driving sequences in the first movie were handled by stunt drivers, by the second movie, Paul was ready to take on a bit more of the performance driving and maybe even a few light stunts. So by the time we started filming Too Fast, Too Furious, Paul was deep into the car hobby. He already owned his own R34 GTR by that time, and he was starting to show interest in racing. Paul, of course, by this time was feeling more confident, and he started making requests to John Singleton to do some of his own driving stunts. Now, at the time, John Singleton's plan was to let the actors ad-lib more and more on this movie. So that kind of fit into it, that if they could do a little of the driving, make it look more authentic too, they can do it. But in one well-known incident, Paul wanted to be the one driving the GTR when it does the little e-brake stop at the end of the first race. Remember that? But anyway, so they let him try it. After a little bit of practice, under the supervision of Terry Leonard, the second unit director, he pulled it off. We all remember the scene. Paul was also then given the go-ahead to do some of the driving in the ensuing police chase. When the cops come, cops, everybody scramble. And if you remember the sequence, as Paul tries to get away from the cops, his car is hit by the ESD harpoon dart. He misjudges a turn, jumps the curb, and takes out a parking meter. That was absolutely not in the script. In fact, originally he was supposed to drive into a ditch. However, when they looked at the film playback, Singleton and Neil Moritz were sitting there and decided that it was a perfect way to end the scene, and so the shot stayed in, and they just did a little rearranging and had the cops come over to the car, point the guns at the car, cut. That was it. No one was hurt, of course, but the car required some extensive, and I might say, some expensive repairs. Could have been worse, right? But another more serious incident took place during the sequence called the audition race. This is the part where several drivers, including Brian and Roman, are trying to recover an item for Carter Verone, the movie's villain, from a car locked up in a boatyard. Remember that? They're on the freeway, and as the cars are weaving in and out of the lanes, one scheduled sequence included the Corvette crashing into another car. Despite the rumors, though, that scene was indeed written into the script. What wasn't written into the script was the Corvette flipping over. Disaster was averted only because Terry Leonard, the stunt director, told the stunt driver that he would need to put a pull strap into the car. A pull strap, for those who don't know, is a strap that's attached to the floor, a hard point on the passenger side of the stunt car. In an emergency, the stunt driver sees he's going to crash, he grabs the strap, pulls his head down below the dash area, and keeps his head low, so if the car rolls over and it lands on the roof and the roof collapses, the driver will be better protected. And of course, the stunt driver was reluctant to do that. He said, oh, nothing's going to happen. But Terry stayed on him, and finally the stunt driver relented, and he probably saved himself from a serious injury by taking Terry's advice. Perhaps the biggest incident in that movie occurred during the bridge jump sequence. We all remember it. The super jumps, the GTR jumps, and then right after that, the S2000 is going to jump, right? The GTR jumped as planned, and despite the expected damage to the car, the stunt driver walked away. CG made it look like the car was doing 150 miles an hour and went 150 feet, but in reality, the jump was done off a 5-foot ramp at about 50 miles an hour. But for the S2000, however, it was a different story. Because we couldn't put a stunt driver in that car because the roll cage would be visible on camera, the stunt team rigged the car to be driven by remote control. And to do that, we put a Sony PlayStation controller with pedals and everything inside a chase vehicle, and then hooked everything up by a radio transmitter. And with everything tested and now in place, we were ready to do the jump. A Dodge Durango was the chase vehicle and carried the driver who used the PlayStation wheel and pedal setup, right? So the two cars take off, the S2000 in the front and the Durango behind it. The problem was that the chase vehicle needed to stay fairly close to the S2000 so that they can ensure that radio signal would not be lost, which would have been catastrophic. Both the S2000 and the chase vehicle headed up the ramp, and while the S2000 sailed off the ramp to the other side, the Durango's brakes weren't as good as expected. The Durango didn't stop in time, and the front of the Durango just fell off that ramp and landed on this bridge part that the ramp was mounted on. The airbags went off on both sides of the car, and the guy operating the remote control system had the PlayStation controller pop back into his lap, and he had some minor injuries. But as bad as this was, it could have been much worse, because had we not placed a ramp there, the Durango chase vehicle would have dropped into the ocean about 100 feet down, and that would have been a disaster. Two people in a locked car upside down in the ocean at night would not have been good. Thankfully, that didn't happen. There was another minor incident during the warehouse scramble rehearsal. While the lead cars in each of these rows were driven by stunt people, many of the cars' actual owners were allowed to drive their own cars that followed out the stunt drivers as they all came out of the warehouse doors. During the rehearsal, however, the stuntman who was driving the orange Julius RX-7 went out the wrong door, and there was no ramp coming out that door. So it basically went right out the door, off the ledge, and fell about 4 feet to the ground. And that car was in a bad way after that. While there may have been other minor incidents in other Fast movies about which I'm unaware, the biggest incident in the franchise so far seems to have been the one that occurred in Fast 9 back in July of 2019. This sequence required the stuntman to be high up off the ground, and a safety cable might have broken, which led to the stuntman Joe Watts, who is the stunt double for Vin Diesel and has been for some time, Basically, he fell from about a 30-foot perch and landed partially on his head. He was placed into an induced coma, and after making substantial progress, he was released from the hospital in August of 2019. So we wish Joe a full and speedy recovery. The whole incident is yet another reminder that making these movies can be extremely dangerous. These high-flying, explosive stunts have only the tiniest of margins of error. One little slip and bad things can happen. So to those of you stuntmen and women in the industry, on behalf of all of us Fast and Furious fans, we can't thank you enough for making the Fast and Furious movies the very best car movie franchise in history. That'll wrap it up for this episode. Tune in next time for more behind-the-scenes stories. And if you're liking the content, do me a favor, please consider subscribing. We'll see you next time.